district, we were compared to, when you talked about the number of guidance counselors per student, that also support 6 schools in their district. Which school are we compared to that has 6?
Well, there are we're the only one that has 6, but you have to bear in mind.
Thank you. If we choose to keep 6 schools open, we need, as taxpayers, as responsible taxpayers and citizens, we need to be prepared to staff the schools. If you choose not to staff the schools, then we need to look at what we have available. If we don't have enough kids in the schools to keep them open, then we need to look at that, not by cheating the kids that are currently there. Because I invite any one of you who are choosing to remove the guidance counselor to come sit with my first grade class in the hallway when they're pulled out because there's a student who is either kicked, bitten, or is screaming profanities at a teacher. So I invite you to come, or maybe you just want to tell the student which day of the week that they can do that on. Let's think about it.
You have to bear in mind that we have 6 schools, but one of those schools has 55 students in it. 55 students, which has a full-time nurse. So many of the issues that you bring up, a nurse can handle just as well as a guidance counselor. Every school, I'm not interrupting you, so please don't interrupt me. If you have something to say, please take the microphone. Every single school has a nurse. And I can tell you, we're way out of whack with nurses. But we made a decision that when it comes down to it, that our school district parents would prefer to have a nurse there if they had to choose between nurse and guidance. There are 6 guidance counselors in Farmington with 4 schools. There are 4.5 in Hillsborough-Deering for 4 schools. There's 5.1 for 4 in Interlakes, 5 for 3 schools in Messinic, and 6 for 5 in White Mountain, and 6 for 5 schools in Winnisquam. However, when you look at the student ratio, our schools are very close together. It's not a big deal to have a guidance counselor so many days in one school and so many days in the other. And may I repeat, the only 2 schools impacted by what I feel would be the logical thing to do would be Danbury and New Hampton. New Hampton would have 4 days of a guidance counselor with 121 students, and Danbury with 55 students would have 1. That could be different based on what the school board and the administration determined to do. But there is adequate guidance counselor coverage per state law, more than adequate, we felt, and that is why we made that reduction. Yes, ma'am.
Just a point that...
Re-identify yourself, please.
Jennifer LaRochelle Hebron. In Danbury, the school nurse also serves as the assistant principal because our principal is not in the building 5 days a week. Our school nurse also serves as the testing coordinator 3 times a year when we do major testing. Our school nurse also serves as the guidance counselor 3 days a week because we only currently have one for 2 days a week. And the school nurse is a one-on-one aide in my math class when she's not doing something else. We can't do it with less.
Are there any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, Slim again from Groton. I'm glad the previous young lady spoke and asked the question that I'm going to ask, because this was brought up a couple years ago when Mrs. Hill, Ruby Hill, tasked herself with the idea of consolidating schools. I want to know what happened to that. How come we haven't done it? And we could be doing, as the young lady said, looking at that and maybe cutting there and actually accomplishing something. So can I ask Ms. Ruby Hill to come to the mic to explain what happened to that program?
You know, I think I can probably.
Oh, can you do it? Sure. Go ahead, Fran.
There was great discussion about that, particularly 3 years ago. There was quite a look at Danbury's first closing it. At that point in time, the cost per student was approximately $20,000 per student, which was significantly more than the average cost district-wide. And there were fewer than 55 at that time. There was some changes made, and I think a grade pulled back to bring up the numbers, and to keep it open because the community of Danbury felt so strongly, wanted to keep their school open, that they reconfigured the classrooms. They joined classrooms, so there are 2 grades in one class and so on, and they were able to get the cost down within the scale of what the other elementary schools were. So the decision was made at that time to leave Danbury open. There was a warrant article to look at going to a K through 8 scenario for the schools. That was quite a study committee that was done. Didn't seem to go anywhere, and I do know that Superintendent Buckley, that was one of the first things she was tasked with when she got there, was to look at all the schools and see if there were any consolidations that would make sense, and her recommendation was at this time it did not. I will also tell you that there is some discussion with another community to tuition into the newfound school district. Obviously that will not affect this year's budget, but it could potentially nicely impact next year's budget if they do so. It's kind of too early to tell if that happens, but we will continue to look at reconfiguring schools. You know, to be honest, keeping a school open for 55 students doesn't make a lot of sense, but we're trying to be recognizing the community and keeping a full-time nurse, even if she does a lot of other things, for 55 students doesn't make a lot of sense. But we have chosen not to look at that and to leave full nursing across the district at every school. Superintendent Buckley, would you like to add anything?
I would just add that that presentation that I did is on the website, so it's the video of it, so you can certainly watch it and get the information there.
Did that also include the Hebron Bridgewater School? Because there was a good plan for that too, originally also, I believe.
It included all of the schools. It included looking at closing, reconfiguring. It looked at looking at K to 6, K to 8, and pretty much every option I looked at.
Yes, sir.
This school board supports community education. We have repeatedly over the past few years reaffirmed that support for community education. So you gotta stop picking on Danbury. It is 12 miles from Bristol. You can't put a first grader on a bus and expect to bus them all the way into the remaining elementary schools. That's tantamount to child abuse. Now, with that said, the overriding elephant in the room continues to be the declining enrollment in the district. I'll say no more about that, but to refer you to the numbers that continue to decline and the eventuality that we may have to face. But I will tell you that a result of Superintendent Buckley's analysis that she did an excellent job with, I thought, under the circumstances, was that we are about to establish a facilities committee to review and look at what the needs of the district are in an ongoing manner. And usually that is done when there are circumstances with overcrowding. Unfortunately for us right now, that is not the case. And as some have pointed out, it costs money to have 6 facilities remain open. The facilities committee will be built on Monday evening in terms of who's going to be on that from the school board. It will become a subcommittee of the board on an ongoing basis. That was the vote we took the evening of Ms. Buckley's presentation. I would encourage you to begin to follow the history of what that committee will do, and more importantly, to participate. I have counted 41 or so people that have come in and out this evening at the budget hearing. I would certainly hope that the deliberative session will bring out a lot more to have this community discussion that we have continued to suggest needs to happen. Thank you.
That brings us to the end of the, oh, I'm
That'd be
sorry.
ready.
Go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
Kathleen Connor Hebron. And I'll have to say I'm very hesitant to speak tonight because I am a guidance counselor. I'm a resident of the community. I'm a taxpayer. I'm a parent of 2 children in the district. Those are my priorities of my children. And I would have to say I include all the children I see every day in the school building as a part of who I'm responsible for. And I'll have to say I'm very concerned that the numbers being recommended by the Department of Education are not looking at the reality of a situation. I think the guidance counselor recommendations are certainly a recommendation. They're also couched within many other recommendations. And if all of those pieces aren't equally being addressed, there are needs that are being will go unmet. I honestly, all guidance counselors, as I have to say, we all do something different. So what one guidance counselor does in another district is different than what we do. I heard some analysis going on for the budget committee meeting, and just one piece alone that stands out is that when a child's in crisis, we call the police and we call DCYF. Well, I need to let you know we have children in our school highly supported by their families, by their community, that there's no reason to call DCYF. So that's one. So, okay, what do we do with that child? And then do we call the police when they're under the table and struggling because they don't know how to read and they're in 2nd grade and they've got a significant learning disability and they can't deal with the crisis? And again, just as Jen La Rochelle said, you can't just stop everything when the responsibilities that a teacher has to get accomplished during the day. For that one child, you need other people there. And I appreciate that you need to look at all the angles to save money. We are all dealing with the same issues. But I'm gravely concerned about that one child and all the other children in the classroom who are going to lose out on education, but also see this child in distress. And I'm not talking about a child that needs necessarily a huge amount of support, but in that moment, they need tremendous support. And if they're given it, they can regroup, they can develop those coping skills, and they can get back in the classroom. But if someone's not willing to teach those children those skills and spend that moment of time with them, they will not. And I'm very concerned that where this budget is such a focus, that I'm concerned about out-of-district placement. You start calling a police officer in to take a child out of a classroom, that's going to cost you, one, but also you're building up a pattern of saying, well, maybe this child shouldn't be in the school, and maybe they need to be educated outside the school. And I would say that's ridiculous for the number of children that we serve that just need help in that moment. And I'd like to know, if there's not a guidance counselor in my school or in one of the other schools, who is covering what I do during the day? Who is going to do that? Because everybody else's responsibilities are going to increase. I would like to know who's going to keep those kids safe and all the other children in the classroom. Thank you.
Thank you. I will tell you, having been at the meeting where that comment was made, it certainly was not being made as a generalization that for all kids. But in the context of the discussion, it was talking about abused children. And of course, the appropriate thing is to call the police and to call DCYF.
That needs to be clarified as well, because there was also a comment that the guidance counselors are coddling the children, and so they should get to the nurse because the guidance counselors are coddling. I'd like to know what that looks like and the perception of who the person who said that or people who believe that. I would like you to be educated and informed. I want the people here to know what we actually do in the schools. There was a lot of critical comments made on that budget committee meeting, and I felt very uncomfortable listening to it. And honestly, not for just myself. It was very uncomfortable because it just told me that the word that's getting out to the community is not accurate, if that's the only word they're getting. And maybe you're not getting the accurate information either. So maybe there needs, I see one person who's a wonderful parent in our school because he's there, he's picking up his kids, he's in the school. But beyond anybody else, I don't see people in the school. I don't see people asking, Kathleen, what do you do during the day? Are you just sitting at your desk? What do you do? How do you enforce and teach the curriculum that has been approved by this school district? How do you do that? I don't see that happening, and I'm concerned about it.
I will say that when we looked at some of the comments that were made to us, and we realize that unfortunately school districts and teachers have been put in the position where they have taken over for the role that the parent should be doing. That child wouldn't be having the meltdown if there was an understanding ear at home. Somebody just talked a little bit ago about dinner table discussions and so on. How do we convince the community and parents that they need to change their ways instead of government becoming the parent more and more and more? That, I think, is the feeling of many people when they look at the role that some of the employees of the school district have had to take on or feel they have to take on rather than strict teaching. In the old days, schools were for education and learning, not for becoming substitute parents.
And
having said that, I gave you the number per student, per guidance counselor, and as you saw, we were significantly lower number than a number of surrounding school districts. So how do they do it? Do they have better parents that are more understanding of their children, or do we just have really bad parents in the newfound school district that we have to have so many more guidance counselors? I'm really sad that you would say that. I'm really sad that you would say that. Well, I'm sad that I have to say that, but when, we have given strong reasoning by the numbers, other school districts do it, and we understand that things are difficult, but we can't take on the weight of everything as a education system.
And I completely agree with you. And I can think of some of the most wonderful supportive parents in our school who have tricky kids and who I've spent a lot of time with, a variety. And it would make me incredibly sad to have any of those parents hear that comment, because we are incredibly supportive parents who access support outside the school. But honestly, those children are in our school. When they're there, we are responsible. We can't be calling home every other day saying, well, so-and-so's doing this, so-and-so's that. We've got to figure it out too. And we do, because we would be responsible for an out-of-district placement. That's the other side of it. And I find that it's just sad to think that the perception, there are families that are struggling. There's probably been families struggling forever. And some of those kids never made it to school because their parents couldn't get them. But now we have some compliance issues going on, and it's getting those kids in the school. Well, that's the next step. We're getting them there. We got to keep them there.
Thank you. I don't know who was at the microphone first. I think you were.
Becca Boudreaux, Bristol again. I don't have any kids of my own, but I have been teaching for 26 years. So I have 360 kids times 26 years. I just have a question to ask. Do you have any behavior specialists in your district that are employed? Just a question. You don't have any behavioral specialists. And no offense to the guidance. We do a lot of it. I know you do. I'm just saying that you have a full-time job here, but I'm thinking maybe perhaps you should think about going the behavioral specialist route in lieu of the guidance counselor, because we have one for our 360 kids. And when the guidance counselor is doing her classes and doing such things like that, when the heavy hitter kids come, they go to this room and they have a plan, and this person is, no offense, trained in certain behaviors. So I'm thinking perhaps you might want to think about taking that $50,000 and maybe thinking about a behavior specialist for your district and starting small and maybe going from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
April Nguyen from Alexandria. I am just imploring the Budget Committee to, again, look at the guidance counselor position. I graduated from this high school back in the 80s, and times indeed have changed. Back in the 80s, the guidance counselor's job was, at the high school level, was mostly for college, preparing you for college, getting you ready for college. That was the only time in my high school years that I saw my guidance counselor. But now that has changed. The guidance counselor is dealing with preparing you for college, getting you the scholarships, but they are also a fill-in parent. They're who you go to in times of trouble. I have a daughter who is a senior this year at the high school, and she has formed a relationship with her guidance counselor. She has gone to the guidance counselor for scholarship information, for college information, for letters of recommendation, but she has also gone to the guidance counselor when stress has gotten to be too much, and she is literally having a meltdown because she cannot handle the stress of all the college work, plus her school work, plus her job and everything else. She has formed a relationship so much that she wants to go to college and become a high school guidance counselor. So do I go home tonight and tell my daughter, forget that occupation, because in just a few years, a budget committee that does not understand your entire scope of your job is going to say that it's unimportant and cut you? Thank you.
One of the Budget Committee members are pointing out that we never said that the role of the guidance counselor, particularly at the high school level, is unimportant. We looked at facts and we looked at figures. We looked at whether other school districts are able to do with guidance counselors per student, and we looked at what the state requirements are, and we made adjustments based on that, just as we made adjustments 3 years ago when we did an analysis of declining enrollments and the number of personnel. Yes, ma'am.
Celine Gordon, Alexandria. I'm also a teacher at Bridgewater Hebron Village School, 2nd grade, I would like to point out. You have assured us tonight that our jobs in the schools are respected, but I'm afraid that many of us have listened to the comments made at your last meeting, and we do not feel respected. And I would also just like to say, when you invest the minimum, you get the minimum.
Are there any other questions? Before we adjourn, I would like to point out the date of the deliberative session. February 1st, here, 10 o'clock. It's a Saturday. And the snow date is the following week. I'm glad I have this little parrot here. Are we going to have babysitting? Oh, it's going to be babysitting. That is when this will be debated again. Questions can be asked, amendments can be suggested, so on. And then, of course, what the final outcome is will go on the ballot for March 11th when you go to vote at your town, as I described earlier, when you vote for selectmen and municipal officers and so on. Are there any other questions? Is there anything else to come before this meeting? Madam Superintendent, have I forgotten anything? Yes, Mr. Ogier. And may I also say that there will be a public hearing, a public budget committee meeting after a 5-minute recess as soon as this meeting adjourns.
One quick question. Last year, the district voted to have $250,000 put, and you know what I'm talking about, and I'm wondering what the status of that situation is at this point.
I can address that, or Mike, if you want to. It was voted that a certain percentage, not to exceed 2% of any, 2.5% of any balance at the end of the year could be carried forward as a retained balance. That was approved by the voters. The school board, there was money left over. The school board did that in the amount of $350,000. Now that just can't be used for anything. There's supposed to be special circumstances of funding shortfalls that would trigger the use of that. However, what it did do, there were several categories in this budget that they were able to remove that we had carried in the past of contingency funds, because they felt, why go ahead and raise money just in case, because we won't raise that money because we do have a fund we can fall back on. And it looks like the school board chairman would like to say something.
I believe, Mr. Ogier, you're referring to RSA 198-4-B, Section 2. Just to clarify, the RSA, as Fran aptly covered for us, allows us, now that the public had faith in us enough to allow us to adopt this, what we did over the summer, once we determined that there was a surplus, the percentage is actually calculated on the monies raised by taxes. Is that not correct, Mike? 12 million. So 2.5% of the number was a ceiling, and it was higher than 350,000. I think it came in around close to 400,000. We voted to send 50,000 back to the taxpayers to reduce taxes. And then we decided to save, to retain 350,000 for the retained fund balance. Now, one thing I want to make clear is that this fund balance is to be used for emergencies, over expenditures, or to reduce taxes. And in order for the first two of those things to happen, the school board would have to get permission of the budget committee to then approach the Commissioner of Education to approve whatever the request is. It's not just for emergencies, and it's not just for over appropriations. It can also be used to reduce taxes. Now, the justification behind selling this to the public last year was that we wanted to be able to budget without the numerous contingencies that over the years we had previously done. Special ed, transportation, fuel oil, healthcare, all those kinds of things had buffers in them, which is what would cause the fund surplus in the first place. So this year, as a result of having a fund surplus, we were able to take up to 2.5% of the taxes raised, which is around $12 million, and call that a retained fund balance. So in this year's budget, we have available to us $350,000 for that purpose. Thank you.
And that can't be done every year. If of that 300 and however many thousand it is, if they use 20,000, they can only replenish it. It's not like every year they can do another 2.5% and keep growing a bigger fund. It can never exceed that 2.5% total. Yes, sir. Yes.
Fran, one correction. I stand corrected on the calculation. It's on the entire budget, roughly the 20 million we were talking about.
Representative Riley.
Right.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Harold Riley from Alexandria. I've been serving on the Budget Committee here now for close to 9 years. And I've heard a lot of legitimate complaints here tonight from the teachers and from citizens. A few years ago, we used to, and I want to address this basically towards the teachers, because your complaints are kind of hollow in that you complain to us here tonight, but where have you been with all of the budget meetings? That's where we can find out. You come in and say, you know, we need this. Well, fine. I remember Principal Chase coming in at the middle school here a couple of years ago with a program that he was trying to get in. And it was a pilot program. He brought it to us, and we understood it, and we voted him the extra money for it. And this is it. We don't know specifically what you're talking about with this chair is broken or that chair is broken. But if you come in and say, look, if we got 25 chairs broken here, we need to replace them. Well, fine, that's something that should not be cut out of the budget. I agree with you 100%. But we're not mind readers. But what have we got, 25 or 30 teachers here tonight out of 115? Where are the other teachers? Where are the other people coming here? I don't see anybody at any of our budget meetings. And, you know, we got to get information back from you people. You're the ones, you're in the trenches, you're working with this stuff. Well, help us out to understand your needs. And as far as the state regulations on the number, well, I'm a legislator. Come talk to me. I'll introduce a bill. Or we'll have other legislators introduce bills to the Education Committee. And maybe we can change some of the stuff down in, excuse me, I get a little short-breathed here. Or we can change some of the stuff down in Concord. But without your input, it's not going to happen. Oh, please, I'm just, you know, it's a two-way street here. Help us to help you.
Can I respond, since I was one of the people speaking? Can I respond? 'Cause I don't know what the kosher way of, how do we do this? Can I stand in the microphone?
It's actually a hearing, not a debate. That would be up to Representative Riley, if he'd like to.
I'd love to answer a question for her if she has a question.
Certainly, ma'am, if you'd like to ask a question.
I don't have an answer. What I have is, the comment is that each of us every fall put together a budget. We present it to our administrators, and our administrators, I believe, have us in their budget. And they have our needs represented there. And I can't speak to everybody's, but I can speak in comfortably, I know in my school, we share what we need, and our principal represents us, and I believe I was in his budget. And I believe the other guidance counselors were in their administrator's budget. So I'm not sure, maybe we need a different protocol of how we communicate, but I think we all have felt that we were in there, and we were representing what we needed for a majority of things. I can't speak to everything because I really don't, not covering all parts.
You're in there in numbers on a piece of paper, you know, and that's it. There's a bottom line, X number of dollars here, X number of dollars there. And all we had to do was work with his numbers. But sometimes if you came to some of the budget meetings, it's open to the public, and you say, hey, you know, on that particular line item, you want to take and cut this or increase that, we need this. Well, then we know where the money is going, and we can justify the money being spent. Okay, we have to answer to the taxpayers too. You know, I'm a taxpayer, you guys are taxpayers, but we also, somebody comes up to me and says, what are we spending all this money on furniture every year, or on this or that, or whatever the case may be? I don't know, it's a line item. It says X number of dollars that we need it. And it's kind of like, don't you know what's going on? Yes, ma'am.
I would like to reciprocate the invitation. We are all in school every day from 7 to 3 o'clock. Please stop in any time and ask us questions about what we're doing and how we're doing it.
I'm in the legislature 2 to 3 days a week, I have budget committee meetings here. I have a business to run, and, you know, and I gotta keep wood on the fire too, so. it's,
Okay, we're not going to get in a debate anymore. Thank you. Just one comment as to how the budget comes about. Well before it comes to the school board, the administration talks with the principals of each school. They come up with their list of things that they feel that they need. There was an item in there that was some chair replacements that we did not touch. So I think they were music department chairs. I don't know what department the chairs are that you were referencing to, but all of that input is taken at the school level. I know last year we met with many of the principals and talked with them about their wishes as well. Anyway, unless there's any other further questions about the warrant articles as presented here tonight, I will adjourn this meeting. Thank you for coming, and see you at the deliberative session, hopefully.